Ladies and gentlemen, good day. Today I have in my hand one of the best novels of the world literature. The name of this novel is Don Quixote. It is written by a very famous Spanish writer and it is in Spanish. The name of the writer is Miguel de Cervantes. It is published in 1605. So Cervantes born in 1547 and he died in 1616. So this novel, the Don Quixote, it is consisted upon two parts. So let me introduce you about this novel. What does it? It depends and how. What is the story of who is Don Quixote? Actually, Don Quixote was a Spanish gentleman, a middle-aged gentleman from the region of La Mancha in central Spain, obsessed with chivalry's ideals touted in books he has read. He decided to take up his lance and sword to defend the helpless and destroy the wicked. After a first failed adventure, he set out a second one with somewhat befuddled laborer named Sancho Panza. Sancho Panza is his squire, and Don Quixote decided his actual name was not Don Quixote, but he later on dubbed himself as Don Quixote, but his real name was Senora Quijona. And he later on, while he was reading, he had read too many books about the chivalries and romances and about the knight's adventure. So he lost his mind and he called himself Don Quixote, and he started to come out from his home. He had taken a horse, a very tiny and thin horse. The name of this horse is Risonante, and he convinced Sancho Panza, a peasant laborer, to come and to be his squire. Once a very famous writer, George Bernard Shaw, had said that reading made Don Quixote a gentleman, and believing what he read make him mad. So when he has persuaded to accompany him on his faithful squire. In return for Sancho's services, Don Quixote promised to make Sancho the wealthy governor of an island. On his horse Rocinante, a born nag well past his prime, Don Quixote rides the roads of Spain in search of glory and grand adventure. He gives up food, shelter, and comfort, all in the name of peasant woman, as his imaginary lover, a peasant woman, Dulcinea del Toboso. He called her Dulcinea del Toboso, whom he envisions as a princess. On his second expedition, Don Quixote becomes more a bandit than a savior, stealing from and hurling baffled and justifiably angry citizens, while acting out against what he perceived as though to his knighthood or to the world. Don Quixote abandons a boy, leaving him in the hands of an evil farmer simply because the farmer swears an oath that he will not harm the boy. So he steals a barber's basin that he believes to be the mythical Mambrino helmet, and he becomes convinced of the healing power of the balsam of the Ferioris Auxiliar that makes him so ill that by comparison he later feel healed. Sancho stands by Don Quixote, often bearing the brunt of the punishment that arise from Don Quixote's behavior. The story of Don Quixote, often bearing the Don Quixote's deeds includes the story of those he meets on his journey. Don Quixote witnessed the funeral of a student who dies as a result of his love for a disdainful lady turned shepherdess. He frees a wicked and devious galley slave, Guana de Pasamonte, and unwittingly reunites two bereaved couples, Cardenio and Lucinda, and Ferdinand and Dorothy. Torn apart by Ferdinand's treachery, the four lovers finally came together at an inn where Don Quixote sleeps dreaming that he is battling a giant. Along the way, the simple Sancho plays the straight man to Don Quixote, trying his best to correct his master's outlandish behavior. So, outlandish behavior and fantasies. Two of Don Quixote's friends, the priest and the barber came to drag him home, believing that he is under the force of an enchantment. He accompanies them, thus ending his second expedition, the first part of the novel. In the second part of the novel, begins with a passionate, inactive against a phony sequel of Don Quixote's that was published in the interim between Cervantes' two-part. Everywhere Don Quixote goes, his reputation gleaned by others, from both the real and the false version of the story precedes him. As the two embark on their journey, Sancho lies to Don Quixote, telling him that an evil enchanter has transformed Dulcinea into a peasant girl, undoing this enchantment, in which even Sancho comes to believe becomes Don Quixote's chief goal. Don Quixote meets a duke and duchess who conspire to play tricks on him. They make a servant dress up as a Merlin, for example, and tell Don Quixote that Dulcinea enchantment, which they know to be a hoax, can be undone only if Sancho whips himself 3,300 times on his naked backside. Under the watch of the Duke and Duchess, Don Quixote and Sancho undertake several adventures. One of the adventures, like he started to fight with a windmill, imagining that windmill as a very giant or a big giant. Don Quixote started to fight with the windmill, and he was badly defeated by the windmill. Also, he went in another adventure and attacked flocks of sheep, which he considered it as the enemy's soldier. So Don Quixote went into many expedition and adventure. They set out on a flying wonder horse, hoping to slay a giant who has turned a princess and her lover into a metal figurines and bearded the princess' female servant. During his stay with Duke, Sancho became governor of a fictitious island. The rules for 10 days until he is wounded in an onslaught. The Duke and Duchess sponsor for their entertainment. Sancho reasoned that it is better to be a happy laborer than a miserable governor. A young maid of the Duchess' home falls in love with Don Quixote, but he remains a staunch worshipper of Dulcinea. Their never consummated affair amuses the court to no end. Finally, Don Quixote set out against on his journey, but his demise comes quickly. Shortly after his arrival in Barcelona, the night of the white moon, actually an old friend in disguise vanquished him. So Cervantes relates the story of Don Quixote as a history which he claims to be translated from a manuscript written by a Moor named Cid Hamid Benengeli. Cervantes became a party to his own fiction, even allowing Sancho and Don Quixote to modify their own histories and comment negatively upon the false history published in their names. In the end, the beaten and battered Don Quixote forswears all the chivalric truth he followed so fervently and dies from a fever. With his death, knights errant became extinct. Benengeli returns to the end of the novel to tell us that illustrating the demise of chivalry was his main purpose in writing the history of Don Quixote. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you about the key facts of this novel. This is an adventure novel. The name of this is Don Quixote de la Mancha. The author of this novel is Miguel de Cervantes. The type of this it is a novel. A genre of this novel is parody, comedy, romance, morality novel. Language, first published in Spanish language. Time and place written in Spain in late 16th and early 17th century. Date of publication of first part of this novel is 1605. Second part is 1615. Setting place of this novel is Spain. The protagonist, the hero of this novel is Don Quixote. Major conflict and first part, Don Quixote set out with Sancho Panza on a life of chivalric adventure in a world no longer governed by chivalric values. The priest attempts to bring Don Quixote home and cure his madness. The second part, Don Quixote continues his adventure with Sancho and Samson Carrasca, the priest, conspired to bring Don Quixote home by vanquishing him. At last, Don Quixote realized that he is not a knight and a fighter knight or a chivalric knight, but he's a simple peasant man. So he gained sanity and on the last hour of his life. The rising of action of this novel is Don Quixote wanders Spain and encounter in the Sierra Morena. Second part of this novel, Don Quixote has many adventures, especially under the watch of haughty Duke and Duchess. Climax of the first part of this novel is that the priest meet in the Sierra Morena and Dorothy begs for Don Quixote to help her avenge her stolen kingdom. Second part, Samson disguised as the Knights of the White Moon defeat Don Quixote. Following action of this novel is the priest and the barber take Don Quixote in his cage, and Don Quixote resign himself to the fact that he is not a real knight, but he is a simple man. And the second part of this novel, Don Quixote returns home after his defeat and resolve to give up knight chivalry. Motive of this novel is honor, romance, and literature. The character involved in this novel is Don Quixote, the novel's tragic comic hero. Don Quixote main quest in life is to revive knight errantry in a world devoid of chivalric virtues and values. He believes only that he chooses to believe and sees the world very differently from most people. Honest, dignified, proud, and idealistic, he wants to save the world as an intelligent as he is mad. Don Quixote starts out as an absurd and isolated figure and ends up as a pitiable and lovable old man whose strength and wisdom had failed him. The other character involved in this novel is the Sancho Panza, the squire, the peasant laborer, greedy but kind, faithful but cowardly. Rocinante, the horse, the thin horse of the Don Quixote. Rocinante is slow but faithful. He is worn out as Don Quixote is. The other, dapple Sancho's donkey. The name of the donkey which Sancho Panza rode was Dapple. Said Hamid Bengali, the fictional writer of Moorish descent. Dulcinea del Toboso, an imaginary lover of Don Quixote. The unseen force driving all of Don Quixote's adventures. Dulcinea, a peasant woman whom Don Quixote envisioned as his lady love. So the Duke and the Duchess, Altisidora, another character, Samson Carrasco, his friend who disguised himself as a knight of the White Mirror, the priest, the barber, Teresa Panza, Cardinia, Lusanda, Ferdinand, Dorothy, and Countess Trifaldi. These are the characters involved in this novel. This is a very beautiful novel. I think one must read it. And about this, George Bernard Shaw had rightly said that reading made Don Quixote a gentleman, but believing what he read made him mad. Thank you very much for your precious time.